people today. They could spend half their lives over 50. That's a lot of living. So it helps to have a wise friend and fierce defender in your corner. A friend like AARP. So your health lives longer.
This is just slow-mo karate?
Just slow-mo karate.
Your money lives longer.
I just bought that.
I just sold that.
And your happiness lives longer. That's why the younger you are, the more you need AARP. Join today.
Good morning, and welcome to AARP Illinois' special virtual event. I'm Teresa Jones. I'm the Associate State Director, and I'm here with Courtney Hedderman, our Senior Associate Director of Advocacy and Outreach as well. So together, we are your Fraud-Fighting Fraudlettes. So again, we are thrilled to be bringing you the latest on frauds and scams, and ultimately aiming you with the information that you'll need for prevention and reporting if you're ever a victim. But we're excited. Today, we're really excited to bring you and to share some amazing news. Senate Bill 2319. You've heard us talk about it before. Well, it passed the Illinois General Assembly over the weekend, and we're going to dive deep into legislation and what happens next. But that's not all we're excited about. We're equally excited to welcome Jake Hamilton from the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation to our event today. And Jake and the department were more than instrumental in the passage of this legislation. But before we get started in our discussion, I'd like to remind our Facebook and our YouTube viewers that you can ask questions and share your comments in the social media feeds. We'll do our best to address as many of your questions and as possible during our conversation. So again, we are excited to welcome Jake Hamilton, the Interim Regulatory Innovation Officer for the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. Thank you, Jake, for being here, and welcome. But to kick things off, let's start with some questions about our topic. So, congratulations on all the work you and the department did for Senate Bill 2319. It's thrilling. It's more than thrilling that the legislation passed. We thought it would be great to talk about the bill and what it means. But the first question is really to understand what digital assets are overall. So digital Digital assets is a fancy term for cryptocurrency. So perhaps you can tell everyone what is cryptocurrency.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. I'd love to, but I do want to just say thank you to AARP and Courtney and Teresa for having me here today, and congratulations to AARP and both of you and on the work on getting Senate Bill 2319 passed, and thank you for all the work you've done over this legislative session to make sure that we got this legislation passed. But yeah, let's dive in. So cryptocurrency is a fancy term. I would, the way I typically describe cryptocurrency is that it's really a digital representation of value, which means all that means is just that it represents an amount or a value of something online. And the thing that I always point to is there's a technology that kind of underlies the cryptocurrency, whether it's your listeners may have heard of like Bitcoin or maybe Ethereum. But there's a technology called blockchain, and what blockchains are really just like fancy digital ledgers. So like an Excel sheet that keeps track of transactions when somebody sends something from one person to another. And so what the cryptocurrency is it's the representation of value on those blockchains that shows we're sending this much value from this place to this other place on the blockchain. And so the cryptocurrencies, they're completely digital. They exist online. They have, wildly fluctuating values sometimes. Bitcoin, for example, has been as low as like in the thousands of dollars. And I think, recently it's been up over $100,000 lately. So yeah, they can jump in value a lot. And there's lots of different types of them, but really they help represent value on blockchains, which record transactions online.
Thank you so much for that. I think was a really great way to kind of set up the rest of our conversation, frankly. And just, I think, and I don't know about anybody else out there, but, cryptocurrency is not something I've really dabbled very much in personally. And so, there's always a learning curve. And I think you just set it all up perfectly. So one of the things that we know is that cryptocurrency hasn't really been regulated as an industry, I think is a great way of probably saying it. And so I guess, why is that an industry that should be regulated? And that's a little bit obviously what this bill did, and another bill actually that passed as well this session, kind of regulating this industry. So can you talk a little bit about the regulatory part and why it was important to have regulation?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And that's a great question, Courtney. So cryptocurrency really, I think, kind of came on. People started working with it in around 2008, 2009, when Bitcoin was invented, and since then, there's really been no kind of comprehensive regulatory scheme or framework at the federal level. And then states have taken different approaches to regulating cryptocurrency, and Illinois just now joined a handful of other states that have kind of taken different approaches to regulating cryptocurrency. But I think there's definitely a need for regulation in the space because people have been interacting with cryptocurrency, whether they buy some to invest in it and hope that the value goes up, or maybe they want to use it to send money to someone else. And typically when they would do those types of things with, regular fiat currency like US dollars or euros, there's a ton of regulation in place that's been in place for decades that oversees all of those kinds of transactions and those different types of financial services. But those similar types of regulations don't exist in the crypto world today, or at least there isn't, there's a patchwork of it at the state regulation level, and there's no regulations for the federal framework. And so people are using cryptocurrency like financial services, but without regulation and protections in place. And because of that, I think what we've seen is there's been a lot of fraud and scams that have developed in the cryptocurrency industry, as people don't really know what it is, and they don't know that it's not exactly regulated. And so as the fraud and scams have grown in cryptocurrency, there's a greater need for us to have some oversight by financial regulators to make sure that we're stopping that kind of activity.
Sorry, go ahead, Teresa.
No, you go ahead.
No, you go. Well,
I was just getting ready to say that was probably a great segue into our next question is what type of, and we know we talk about frauds and scams and we talk about it broadly, but are there specific frauds and scams that Senate Bill 2319 aims to prevent?
Yeah, so I would say that I would start by saying that a lot of these frauds and scams are the same type of scams that people have been using for a long time to scam people. And cryptocurrency is really just the new payment mechanism that they're using to get money out of people. But these scams can be, of various types. There's things called romance scams, where people maybe meet somebody online, and then, they go back and forth, they develop a relationship, and eventually somebody starts asking someone else to send money. Typically, they'll ask to do that with cryptocurrency. There's impersonation scams, where scammers will impersonate the government, whether that's, the FBI or the IRS, or even like in Illinois, I've gotten ones that say I need to pay an Illinois toll.
I got that one the other day.
I did too.
I'm sure many of us have gotten these texts, scam text or phone calls before.
Yeah.
But they'll impersonate like a government entity and say, hey, there's a problem. We need you to fix this. And you can fix this by sending us cryptocurrency, and that'll cover your payment that you owe us. And those are obviously fake. There's a various, other types. Sometimes they might impersonate not a government entity, but a company like FedEx or Amazon. And so really, the goal of these scammers is to convince somebody that there is an issue, or maybe scare them and think that they need to send money right away to fix something, or that they've done something wrong, and to remedy that problem, they need to send money. And so these scammers use cryptocurrency as a way to send money quickly, and then, get people to take money out of their bank account where there's protections, and then put it into cryptocurrency where there's a lot less protections in place.
Yep, that makes sense. So we know, and the thing that we're really talking about today is Senate Bill 2319, which just passed the Illinois General Assembly, like Teresa and you have already indicated. And so maybe we can dive a little bit into the specifics about this bill and some of those provisions, because I do think that there is some really great consumer protection stuff in there that I think is really important for people to know. So maybe let's start with the disclosures. So when somebody goes to a kiosk, there's disclosures, right? And so kiosk operators are going to be required to provide customers with disclosures right before completing a transaction. So maybe talk a little bit about that piece so everybody understands that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start by I want to say that the department, we worked on two pieces of legislation this session, two different bills. One of them is Senate Bill 2319, which addresses digital asset kiosks, or these like crypto ATMs that people may have heard of. And then we have another bill separately that would more broadly regulate the digital asset industry as a whole. It's Bitcoin and other exchanges, and so they're kind of two pieces of the same puzzle. But Senate Bill 2319 focuses on these, what they call Bitcoin or crypto ATMs, or we call them digital asset kiosks, where someone can go and put cash in, and then when they put their cash in, then they can put cryptocurrency into a digital wallet. And these disclosures that you're talking about, Courtney, are the things that would pop up on screen that somebody has to look through or read through before they complete a transaction. And what we wanted to make sure was included in the bill are disclosures that talk about the risk and the nature of cryptocurrency and how it's volatile, how sometimes when you send cryptocurrency, that transaction is final and you can't get that money back. We wanted to make sure it's clear what fees are associated with the transaction, so people know that if they're putting money into a kiosk, how much they're paying in transaction fees. We wanted to put disclosures in about the risk of fraud and scams and how prevalent these have been in the crypto industry. And then also we had other disclosures, and we'll talk more about this refund process that's in the bill, but we wanted to make sure that there's a disclosure for customers that they know what the refund process looks like and how they're entitled to a refund if they are a victim of a scam.
So you spoke about disclosures. So, and you said something about transaction fees. So are there any transaction or fee limits that are imposed on the kiosk operators to protect consumers from excessive charges?
Yes, absolutely. So we were really happy to make sure that was a part of the bill, because we've seen in this industry some of the kiosks charge pretty high transaction fees. And so what we were able to get in the bill was an 18% transaction fee cap, or it's $5 or 18%, whichever is greater. So if it's a smaller dollar, you're capped at $5. If it's a smaller transaction, you're capped at $5. If it's a larger transaction, you're capped at 18%, so that a customer who's making that transaction isn't paying more than 18% in fees, because we've seen in some instances that companies were charging upwards of 30, 20, 30, even 50% in some instances. And so we made sure we got a fee cap in there to limit those excessive charges.
That's a huge victory that was included, for sure. Wonderful. In addition, one of the things that we understand, and something that AARP was really supportive of, is just really understanding the distinction between a new customer and an existing customer. So can you share a little bit about kind of that process of what really is the definition of a new customer versus an existing customer, and why that's kind of important when when using a kiosk?
Yeah, those definitions were really important for the bill. So we kind of put customers in two different categories. I think there's users of these cryptocurrency kiosks who are using them a number of times, and maybe this is a product that they like to engage with. And so we would call those existing customers. And then there's a different category of people who maybe are newer, curious to cryptocurrency, or maybe they are being told to go to a cryptocurrency kiosk because they're a victim of a scam or fraud. And so we wanted those new customers to kind of have an extra layer of protection. And so the way we define new customers is somebody who's never previously used or transacted at a cryptocurrency kiosk. And then they would remain a new customer for 7 days after their first transaction. Or if they do 3 or more transactions, the first 3 transactions, they would be a new customer. After 3 transactions, you'd be an existing customer. Or if you don't hit 3 transactions, it'd be after 7 days, you'd be an existing customer. But we just wanted to make sure those new customers have an extra layer of protection, just to make sure that we're protecting people that might be fraudulently induced or scammed to go to a kiosk and put money in.
So speaking of protections, if someone experiences fraud at a kiosk, can they get a refund? And what are the refund requirements for fraudulent transactions?
That's a great question, Teresa. Yes, so now with this legislation, if somebody is a victim of scam, or if they go to a kiosk and put money in because someone, they're a victim of fraud or scam, they are entitled to a full refund. New customers are entitled to a full refund for the amount of money that they put in, as long as they're new customers. And so what they have to do to get a refund is that they would have to report that a fraudulent transaction has occurred to the company within 30 days. And then additionally, to provide evidence of the fraudulent transaction, they would have to submit a police report to the company within 60 days of the fraud occurring. And then once they've done that, the company would then be required to issue them a refund for any transactions that they put in.
Those are really great protections, I think. It certainly is going to help a lot of folks that if they're unfortunate to experience fraud and have a chance for some sort of restitution. So that's really great news. So I happened to be, with a whole bunch of friends over the weekend. And of course, I was talking about this because I was waiting bated breath if this was going to pass, like all of us were, right? And so I can't believe it, but of course they heard of, cryptocurrency. Like they had certainly heard the term. They kind of knew a little bit about. The interesting part is when I started talking about the kiosk part and like the protections at a kiosk, and that was what kind of really a big part of the bill. They were like, there's no, what kiosks? Like there are no kiosks like here in Illinois. And are they like across the country? I'm like, there's kiosks everywhere. What do you mean? And I was even like, where do you grocery shop? And they're like, Jewel and other Kroger, etc. They were giving other like locations. And I was like, yeah, those are there. Like you don't even realize probably where these kiosks are. And so can you talk a little bit about part of this actually in kind of ensuring that there's transparency about those physical locations of kiosk locations? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So from what we've seen, our best estimates of a recent government report was that there's around 1,600 kiosks located across Illinois, which is, a pretty large amount. They're located all over the state. And so those are our best estimates. It is a high number of kiosks, but what we put in the bill is that the companies that have kiosks in Illinois would be required to report all of their locations to the department. And part of that is just so that we can get better data, so we can know where all these kiosks are. Because Courtney, to your point, they're located in a lot of places where you would see traditional ATMs, like convenience stores or gas stations, or even Jewel or Kroger or some other stores. I've even seen, like a Coinstar now. Like if you put your loose change in to get cash, you can actually have the option to get cryptocurrency instead of cash. And so, that's actually a type of kiosk, even if it's a company that listeners might be more familiar with. But we wanted to make sure that we got the locations, one, so that we have good data and we know where these kiosks are. And then two, it also kind of helps us keep an eye out for where these things are occurring and if there's any pattern or, prevalence in areas where they're at.
Love it. That's awesome.
Yeah. So the legislation, it requires kiosk operators to register with the department, correct?
Yes.
So what are some of the requirements for the digital assets? There I went on with the whole long name, but so what are some of the registration requirements that they need to have? And can you share the role of the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulations? What role do you play in enforcing this legislation?
Yeah, that is a great question, Teresa. So typically, I think like, financial regulators kind of sit in the background oftentimes. And it's probably good news when you don't hear about us, right? We're doing our jobs well if we're not in the news. But what this bill will do is require kiosk operators to register with the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. And what that means is that to conduct business in Illinois, they would have to submit an application to us, and that application is going to have a bunch of information about their company, the business plan, all of the people who were controlling the company and their criminal background checks. They would have to meet certain thresholds for, financial capability and financial safety and soundness. And then once we would approve an application and issue a registration, then from that point on, to make sure that companies are complying with the law, there would be ongoing supervision. Typically we do that through examinations. So we might have a schedule where we go in and look at a company every year, 18 months, and then just do an examination process to make sure that they're, staying in compliance with the law and doing everything that they need to do to operate safely and soundly in Illinois. And then part of that enforcement ability or authority too is that, if there are companies that aren't complying with the law, then, we could look at that company, kind of find more information about what's going on. And then eventually, if, there's a company that's doing significant wrongdoing, we could take enforcement authority to try to correct the non-compliance with the law.
Okay. Awesome. I know that you guys have a lot of work ahead of you, but really kudos to you as a department, to you, Jake, specifically, in working on this legislation, pushing all of this over the finish line. And really, ultimately, the notion of keeping everybody safe with what your role is going to be now going forward is really incredible. So I thank you for already all the things you've done, but really thank you for what you're about to be doing, because it really is going to help people in making sure that especially these kiosk operators and anybody doing business with cryptocurrency, that they are up to snuff and they're going to be doing the right things and keeping everybody safe while using that type of technology and an opportunity for investment. So thank you very much. Okay, so here's the thing. We know that fraud does happen. And even though that there are many consumer protections in here and there's really great provisions, it could still happen, right? And so there is no doubt that you already kind of mentioned kind of the role of law enforcement and whatnot that will be required, but maybe you can expand a little bit on how this legislation will certainly help support the role of law enforcement in catching criminals as it relates to any cryptocurrency fraud.
That's a great point, Courtney. So we already talked about the location reporting that will be required by the law. And I think part of that will help law enforcement too, so that if there are things that occur, we can, make sure that law enforcement has accurate data about where these kiosks are located and, where they're at in the community and, which businesses they're located in. The other part of it is there is a provision in the law that requires these companies to cooperate with law enforcement if frauds occur. And I think just that cooperation is a big help to law enforcement if they're trying to track down fraud or scams that are happening, because a lot of this stuff happens really quickly. And so making sure that law enforcement is equipped with the best information possible and as quickly as possible can sometimes help, not in every instance, but sometimes can help the law enforcement maybe get the funds back after they're sent. But typically those funds, once they're sent through cryptocurrency, are gone and very hard to recover. But if law enforcement has more information, there might be something they could do to step in before the transaction is finalized. So that's a big part of it too. And then if there's something, if there's somebody that's, doing these crimes or scamming people consistently, and if it's, if it's somebody local, then law enforcement would hopefully be able to step in and stop that person from continuing to perpetrate scams.
Okay.
Yeah, love it.
We've got a couple of comments from YouTube. So, and one of them said that that happened to them. They think the fraud did. They said, but they're not sure if it was crypto, but soon as someone across the ocean, they said, ask them for anything, any money or anything about finances, they said that's an automatic nah for them. So they said it doesn't matter how long they've been talking. So to you, we say kudos.
Yes.
That's a good thing. someone you don't know starts talking to you about, money, sometimes even those you do know, you just have to say, I don't think so. But and then our other, so we're proud of you. It seems like you might need to contact us so you can be a fraud fighter with us. My shameless plug. So, and then our other comment was, they said they've never used a Bitcoin kiosk. And they were asking, why would they? They said, what could a Bitcoin kiosk do for them that paying by a credit card wouldn't do?
That's a great question. So I'll just say at the front that I'm not a certified financial advisor. So I'm not licensed to give financial advice. But credit cards do have a lot of protections built in, and so a lot of people might be familiar with like credit cards. They monitor your transactions, and if they think a fraudulent transaction has occurred, they'll reach out to you first before completing that transaction. And so the reason credit card companies do that is because they have to do the process of getting the money back if the fraudulent transaction occurs. And so they really don't like doing that. And it's costly for them to do so. So they put a lot of work in the front end to make sure that those fraudulent transactions don't happen. And so I think it's good to use your credit cards if you think that's the best thing for you to do. There's a lot of protections using the credit card to buy or make transactions. As far as Bitcoin kiosks, I would say if someone wanted to get involved with cryptocurrency, maybe they haven't done it before, but they're interested with it. I would encourage people to kind of test it out first and start small.
Right.
The reason a person would use a cryptocurrency kiosk versus other ways to get into cryptocurrency, whether it's like online exchanges or other avenues, the cryptocurrency kiosks really allow people to transact cash for crypto. So if you have like an online checking account that you're willing to connect to a crypto exchange, that might be a better option for you because typically the fees are lower. But if you're wanting to purchase Bitcoin with cash specifically, then a kiosk might be an option that someone could look into. But typically the fees associated with that are a little higher than they would be for doing non-cash transactions.
Yep, makes sense. That's great advice. And thank you for everybody who's been putting comments in and asking questions. These are really great. So if anybody has any more, please put them in the chat. So obviously, again, we are truly celebrating that this Senate Bill 2319 passed over the weekend. So Jake, what happens next, right? So we know this just passed the Illinois General Assembly, but what happens next?
Yes, a lot of work and time has been put into getting this passed, and we're super happy that we were able to get this over the finish line. So the bill just passed the Illinois legislature, and so from there, the legislature has 30 days to send it to the governor's desk, and then once the governor receives it, he has 60 days to sign the law. And so once the governor signs the bill, the law will take effect. And then from there, the department will get rolling on implementing the program and setting the regulations up.
Well, just a little spoiler alert, and I don't know if it's really a spoiler alert. I ran into the governor over and I told him, this was before our bill passed, but I had told him that we were looking to get this bill across the finish line. And when it did, we were expecting to see his penmanship. So, so if you're listening, Governor, we're putting that plug in right now for you. So, yeah. So this has been a great conversation. Is there anything else that people need to know?
Well, yeah, Teresa, I heard that you really put the pressure on the governor. So hopefully we'll see his penmanship sooner, soon on this bill. But we're looking forward to when that happens. But I would just add, for the listeners too, there's a lot of confusion and a lot of scams in the cryptocurrency industry right now, especially with these kiosks. I think back to the first commenter that we looked to. We said, if they hear anything about overseas and their finances, they're an automatic no. But I would just really encourage your listeners to look into some of the resources out there. Some of them provided, I've seen great resources on the AARP website that kind of give people more information about these scams so that they can be prepared to say no when they're happening. And that's really the best way to protect yourself, is making sure that you're aware of how these scams take place and, how to prevent yourself from being caught up in one, I think is, so just doing that research and looking into those resources, I think is a great way to protect yourself from scams.
You teed me up perfectly. Thank you so very much, because I'm going to give some of those resources. I can't believe we're actually nearing the end of our call. To our audience, thank you for joining us for this enlightening conversation. Remember, the power to create positive change lies within each of us. So please join us next month for another engaging conversation regarding fraud. So definitely check us out. Obviously, I cannot even say this enough. I mean, so honored, Jake, to have you.
Yes.
To be friends with you now. We're friends. So, and you're part of our AARP family. So thank you so much for being our special guest, for all the work you've done, the entire session. It's all the work that you're about to do. It really is incredible. So Jake Hamilton, the Interim Regulatory and Innovation Officer for the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, you are truly amazing. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yes, right. It's been a pleasure working with you. It really has. So thank you for everything. Okay, so we look forward to continuing our mission of supporting older adults, caregivers, the entire aging community in Illinois. And of course, if you're listening from across the country, there are plenty of cryptocurrency kiosk bills that AARP states across the country are working on. So you want more information, if you're not in Illinois, please check out your AARP office, because there's lots of work happening across the country on this. For more information regarding fraud, you can call 877-908-3360. So again, that's 877-908-3360. That's our Fraud Watch Network, and they're constantly, it's a toll-free number that you can get advice, referral, all sorts of things from. So don't hesitate to contact that number. You can certainly visit our website at aarp.org/Fraud Watch Network. That's aarp.org/Fraud Watch Network. Lots of great information on there, tips, all sorts of things, protect yourself, all those resources that Jake just mentioned actually on cryptocurrency stuff. So please check it out. Now, if you'd like more information about AARP's virtual events, particularly with Illinois, you can visit aarp.org/Illinois. So aarp.org/Illinois. Okay, so before we end, I want to pass it back to Teresa because she has a very special announcement.
All right. Well, I'm Teresa, and this will be my last fraud-fighting fraudlette call for some time. I'm leaving. I'm retiring on Friday. So, yeah. So
yes, kudos.
But I've enjoyed this. I'm not going to prolong this. I have enjoyed doing this. It's one of my favorite things that I have done while working for AARP, and I've done a lot of fun things, and it allowed me to work with great people like Jake and staff, and just, but you guys continue to watch it. I'll be back when Courtney allows me to come back. She wants me to take some time off since I am retiring, but but don't get too comfortable, because pretty soon you'll see this face one more time enter on these, looking like Hollywood squares. We'll be back. So, but thank you for being an integral part of our success. And I'm going to throw one more in there. We all need to be fraud fighters. We all need to be watching what's going on. And if you see something that doesn't look right, report it. Report it to AARP or to your police. But stay tuned with us. We're back every month, so you don't want to miss all the new fraud stuff that's going on that we can alert you about. All right. Well, we love you. Thank you.
Teresa, my cup runneth over. You are incredible. It's been a wonderful ride. Yes, everybody, I did tell her she needed some time off. If you're retiring, you got to take some time, right? But then I told her, and I basically, I don't think I had to maybe twist her arm too much, but I did say she must come back. So I know we'll be seeing you again. So this is certainly not goodbye. It is going to be a see you later. So just lots of love to you. Thanks for everything you have done, Teresa. Happy retirement. You're the best.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everybody, have the most wonderful day. Keep safe out there. Keep being the fraud fighter that you are. Connect with us if you need anything. Jake, again, kudos and congrats to you, and thank you for everything. And Teresa, you and I, what do we say in all of our calls?
Stay safe.
Everybody stay safe. All right, this concludes our call. Thank you.